Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 5, or Don't Shoot Portland's Black Lives Matter, Not Black Friday. My name is Ty Carpenter. I'm the board president, and these panels have been incredible. We've been bringing together lawyers, designers, entrepreneurs, health professionals, and more to sort of speak about the topics that are plaguing Americans amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the rise of racialized violence that's been happening. So can we, I wanted to let everyone know about today's topic will be with community members who are also advocates, artists, and activists. I'm joined with Meshauna Powe, Tamberlee, Tarver, and Layna Lewis, all from the Portland area, and I'm excited to have them talk about root causes of systemic discrimination, in particular the housing rights advocacy and the importance of legal advocacy and access to those resources. I'm going to play a video to start us off, and then Teresa Rayford will be joining us.
White supremacy. What is the very first image that pops into your head when I say these words, white supremacy? Is it white hoods and the KKK? I can tell you based on my work that for most people it is. And this is not surprising because these are in fact manifestations of white supremacy. But white supremacy is so much more than this. Simply defined, white supremacy is the ideology that white people are better than people of color and indigenous peoples, that white people are more deserving, more competent, more able, more professional, and so much more over people of color and indigenous peoples. And white supremacy permeates every single system, structure, practice, procedure that exists in society, and in fact, lives in our bodies, in the minds and bodies of people around the world. Power and privilege are related to white supremacy. Let's go first with power. Power is defined as the social capital that white people garner because they are viewed as being supreme over, they're viewed as being better than people of color and indigenous peoples. And how this shows up in society is in things like better access to education, healthcare, employment, housing, and more. In the workplace, white supremacy looks like white people's better access to job assignments and mentorship and compensation and more. Privilege is defined as the unearned advantages that white people get because they are white and white people have supremacy over others. And so the way it shows up in societies and things like not worrying about driving around late at night and being arrested or being pulled over, or not worrying about what you're wearing on a flight or to the airport in fear that you will experience a rough time at the airport, or going to a coffee shop and not worrying about ordering a drink and waiting for a friend and that you'll be arrested for doing so. That's what privilege looks like in society. In the workplace, privilege looks like things like you can speak the way you want to speak, you can dress the way you want to dress, you can share whatever you want about yourself and not worry about attracting bias. So white supremacy, power, privilege, these terms, these concepts are extremely important, so important for you to understand after today, because if you truly want to become more inclusive and to interrupt racial bias and to serve as an ally, it's really important that you be aware of these concepts and then put them into practice in terms of interrupting them in how you live and work and you lead going forward. I hope this helps. If you're interested in learning more, there's so much more social justice and diversity and inclusion content in my videos and blogs at virthubassine.com and across social media. As always, thanks for watching.
Let me start my video. Hey, all right, so thank y'all for taking in the time to pay attention to that video. I wanted to share that with our viewers because every day of this week, except for yesterday, we played a video because what I've seen since COVID and the uprising of the Black Lives Matter movement and this movement towards solidarity is a lot of people are expressing their views and using their platforms on social media to do so. No matter what their background is, they're finding some way to be an example of interrupting anti-Blackness in their communities. and being anti-racist in their ideology and what they're sharing. And so one of the reasons that I brought everybody here today is obviously it takes a lot of different tools in order to interrupt white supremacy. And not only is it not Black Friday, but Black Lives Still Matter. And so in interrupting, we've had to become very complex during the social media uprising. And when I say complex, I mean centering art, centering a legal system that sometimes is unjust, centering history. And when we center art, history, and the legal system, we see, fights against CRT. We see people wanting to ban books and to basically censor art. And so, in my opinion, since those tools are so strong, it's important that we continue bridging those gaps in our community when it comes to making sure that our children have access to art, access to history, and access to the legal system. One of the things that has been happening in Don't Shoot Portland is for the last couple of years, we've operated a Children's Art and Social Justice Council as a bridge for maintaining that foundation in our activism, and also as a bridge to reach communities and families. And everybody on this screen today has been a part of what that looks like for us. We have Layna Lewis, who is an artist, who is currently, programming and going to school for art. We have Tamberlee Tarver, who's been a community organizer of sorts and a family activist that has helped everybody from grandparents in our education system to people in our housing system, and even herself. We have Meshauna Powe, who is obviously a former board member of Don't Shoot Portland and also my cousin, because we are a family operation. But Meshauna's been doing a lot of work in Liberated Archives, which is one of our staple programs that connects our activism with historical documentation. So I'm going to give a moment for each one of you to kind of talk about who you are, share your work, and then we'll go ahead and enter into a discussion. But whatever you would like to share about yourselves, I would like our viewers to know that about you, and then we'll have our conversation. And thanks again for being here. We're going to start with Layna. And I'll mute myself.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Teresa. I am happy to be here today with, thank you to all the other panelists. Don't Shoot Portland. So my name is Layna Lewis, and I am an artist, activist. About 10 years ago, a group of people, we started Viva La Free, which is an arts organization. We use art as a vehicle to, start to grapple with, explore, and express around really any issue, whatever it is that we want to bring attention to. And in that way, we've been able to be very responsive, whether that's using theater, murals, public art, film, really anything, memes. We did a little cable art show art activism show called Do Something. So it's really, whatever is the most effective, efficient vehicle to, give power and voice to an issue. And in that way, art can pull in people, and also really it moves in a way that traditional methods meet with resistance. And so it's able to, even like water, I think of it like that, how it's able to move and be everywhere, that maybe it wouldn't otherwise get traction. And where people who might not necessarily share or might not think that they share a view, it's a humanizing force where people can really meet. And so currently we're developing a program at Ida B. Wells High School. I am an alumni when it was formerly Wilson. And so the immersive arts program that we're developing will include all of the 9th grade class, which is almost 500 kids. And it's very student centered and student driven. And so they will create an immersive arts installation that will be mobile. And, you know, the process defines the performances. The process is more valued than the product or than the performance and the final outcome. And so we will, you know, we're moving through that process with all of the staff, administrators, teachers, and of course, all of the students, Black Student Union, No Place for Hate, ADL. So yeah, we're here, we're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Layna. And I wanted to go ahead and go to Tammy next.
Yes, I'm Tamberlee Tarver, and I don't really know what to say. I started doing activism before I even knew what I was doing. That's what it was called. Partnering with grandparents raising grandchildren with Miss Carolyn Smith is where I met Teresa. Teresa became my mentor. Really taught me a lot about documenting and about how the systems here is working in Oregon. Kind of delve into educational advocacy with the school to prison pipeline. That impacted my family personally. From there, housing advocacy right now, especially with the evictions and the moratorium, and just general slumlords in Oregon. So I've been learning so much since about like 2010, 2011, learning about the different inequities and injustice and that we're affected by on a daily basis here in Portland in particular, that probably the average citizen isn't even aware because they're not impacted by it. They're not affected. But as a Black resident in Portland, I feel it all the time. I experience a lot of discrimination. A lot of times we don't talk about it because we've just grown accustomed to it. And it shouldn't be our normal. And I think it's finally coming to a time where we're starting to address it and other people are starting to acknowledge it. And we're actually getting the support and help and resources that we need. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tammy. And Meshauna, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and, you know, your history of organizing and activism and leadership?
Yes, thank you for having me here today, Teresa. My name is Meshauna Powe. Teresa and I are first cousins. And I started working with Don't You Portland shortly after moving back to Portland. And just seeing, I guess, with more mature eyes, the changes in Portland. And I didn't like it. I have always been an advocate for human rights back in high school. And after Don't You Portland was founded, I joined the board of directors as the vice president. At the same time, I was working with the Urban League of Portland, working with the jobs program and also with seniors in the aging and disability program. And during that experience, I learned a lot about programming and also reporting and how the state and county and the nonprofits do their collect their data, represent the communities that they are served, and what success really looks like for them. And I found through my volunteering with Don't You Portland, was able to name a lot of what those nonprofits were doing was akin to racketeering, using people as they were numbers, their money. And last summer, just fast forward to last summer, I was one of the assistant I don't want to say curators, a guide for our Liberated Archives exhibit at Holding, and I will share the link in the chat room. On the walls, we had lined a petition from 1945 citing language to keep Black and Brown folks out of schools, jobs, housing, parks, to have the city enforce those types of mandates against Black and Brown people. And I also found one of the first original on the walls. I had no idea that all this information was uncovered in the archives, but one of the first State of Black Oregon reports, where that was originally from, and that was the City of Club of Portland back in 1943. They were commissioned by the City of Portland to do that report. And Urban League and a lot of the other nonprofits were on there. So I thought that those relationships were really cool. They're still fighting for human rights today, but then I also saw how going through the archives, certain language was still like the language that we are using today to explain the services that we're providing, the reasons why they're doing certain like transportation or new building projects, how they're choosing what areas get the renovations that they need, how Blacks and Brown folks and low people who identify as low income are treated. Those are reflected in the same racist writings from the 1940s. We're still doing that today. And the fact that Tammy won her case against a racist institutional system and proved it, that's just phenomenal. For someone as me, I love history, and this is like giving voices or a voice to the silenced, telling a story that we have uncovered through the archives, because this is how we show that the system that is existing today, it was built on racism, and we can't reform that. We have to completely change it. And we have those, we have the facts, we have the blueprints for those. And so that's just a little piece of what I'm doing, and look forward to digging more into later in the discussion.
All right. And so, it being Black Friday and the fact that we want to go ahead and build discussions for our communities so that people can stay engaged in organizing and activism, sharing our stories and having these kind of discussions helps foster what that looks like in our own families and within our own networks. In a lot of the work that I do, one of the first things that come to mind when I'm talking to people that want to be involved is that me and my children to be involved, but I can't get my husband involved, or I can't get my family involved, or I don't know anybody that wants to do this work because they're intimidated by what we do. But I'm thinking that the more we come face to face with people and they see that we're just people that care in our communities about the things that are happening in our communities, and we're literally using our positions in our families to kind of stand up for other people we love, that it becomes easier for people to realize that without them, we won't overcome, we won't win this fight against racism and white supremacy. And when we talked about the title of this program and, identifying the violence in our communities and resolutions and solutions, the violence that I'm speaking to is the uprising in white supremacist violence. Now, when we've gone against the system because of bureaucracy and because of the inequities that exist in it, whether it be the housing, our education system, or, social outreach programs, We've always seen that there's an authority of white supremacy that creates a punitive indoctrination on who we are in our engagement. It's like your children are called at risk or marginalized or disadvantaged when they participate in a system, rather than there being an advancement for success. And so since we're changing those paradigms, I just wanted to uplift, like a couple of years ago, Layna had done a program. And I think this was kind of during the same time that me and Tamberlee had just finished protesting against the lead in the water at the schools, but it was all pre-COVID. But Layna had done a program using protest signs from our activism, and had allowed students in her arts programming to kind of recreate civil rights leaders and to present that to families. And I thought that that was a really cool way to function as a liaison between the messaging of people that were looked at as disadvantaged people with no voice, but having a space to bring that communication to people without it being something that you'll get chased out of the room for, right? I think the partnership with PNCA, the usage of those actual signs that probably were familiar to people, the fact that our children were able to recreate quotes and sentences and statements from people, and I know in that process learning more about those people. How do you think that functions as a tool? And again, I put all of what y'all do together in my mind as components of CRT because it develops an opportunity for us to activate based on our experience, our research, or our determination. But when you were able to share that type of information with the children, and they were able to play that out and provide that foundation of community unity through art, at a time where some schools were, as we know now, banning books. How are you able to do that? And what direct effect do you think that had on communities that sometimes are not able to speak up? Because we knew for years that we had asbestos in our schools. We knew that we had lead in homes in our community. And based on the information that we found when we were fighting those issues in the schools knew it too. Like the families weren't the only ones to know it. Everyone knew it, but there had not been any movement on it for 30 years. And so following that uprising of youth, making that happen in the school system, fighting for their own health and safety, and then bringing in a bridge of a human rights movement to that generation. To me, it's an amazing feat. And so I would like for you to share more about how that made you feel and what type of social impact you had. Obviously in 2020, a lot of the people on the front line were youth, and they were determined, and we understood their message.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Okay, yeah, wow, yes, we were able to, well, first of all, what preceded that, because this was back was 2015, 2016, we had been successful creating some really significant change within Portland Public Schools and an extension program ran by Multnomah Educational Services District. And they do outdoor school, which, is, I went to outdoor school. I was an outdoor school counselor. Well, they since have this program, or they had a program called the Oregon Trail Overnight. And for years, parents and educators, other people had been going through, just like Meshauna referenced, like the way, how do they measure? What do they do around programming? So part of programming is, evaluation at the end. So anyway, for years, parents, other students, high school counselors had been saying, can you please maybe not do this, or had been raising concerns about the program, which is for fourth grade students. They go on an overnight program. Anyway, nothing had been happening. And there had been talk about it for a few years. So I just went like, wow, nothing's happening. I'm tired of talking to adults and we're not getting anywhere. We're trying to, be nice, because that's right. The myth of, part of the tone policing, be nice, ask nicely, ask for permission, all this. Well, I was like, well, nobody's talked to the students. So I borrowed someone's camera and climbed up the friendship tree at Irvington Elementary. And I had developed a list of questions through like family court so that they were not leading questions, but questions that are open-ended. And so I asked 4 students questions about their experience, and I was shocked by what they said. So I hobbled it together, put it out on the Google, just on the Irvington Google group. And in a few days it had 1,000 hits. That was before it ever went public. Well, as a result of that, we got, then it went public, and then we had some local media, national media. We were a panel on race talks. Even before all of that, we were able to transform curriculum, policy, practices, and culture in like less than 2 weeks. What we did was we did a pop-up art action at the school board meeting, which was where they were voting on the next year's budget. And so our demand was, you change the policy, you do not fund anything that is indoctrinating children into white supremacist delusion. You do not, you make sure that everyone, whatever, when you're paying whatever, $60,000, $80,000 for 60 students to have 25 hours of programming, that it's accurate, historically accurate, it's inclusive. And so, yes, that passed. As a result, Multnomah Education and Services Division has scrapped that entire program. They're rebuilding it. Unfortunately, on their website, they do not cite these 4 incredible students who were absolutely critical in them changing their program, bringing it to their attention. We have letters, public letters from MESD elected officials saying thank you to the students. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. But on their website, they're citing another cause that happened, luckily, a few years after the Indian Education Act, Native American Indigenous Education Act, which is critical, fantastic. But that happened after the activism of these students. So anyway, that happened. And then we went on to do a Black History Remix, which the next year, every year during or for Black History Month, there's usually a play. Well, there wasn't one. So for some reason, I decided I was going to produce and direct a play. But before that, we had about 8 weeks of workshops. So the play is an original play that was developed in workshops, only kids. It was closed. The rehearsals, the workshops were all closed, because what we did was we really flipped the educational model by really creating a container within the institution where we removed the hierarchies so that the kids could really start to feel free to express themselves. It was truly inclusive. It wasn't like other after-school programs that give 1 or 2 scholarships, because everyone has access to arts, humanities, history, and tech education at no cost to them and their families. So no one's turned away. Everyone has a part in that. And so where the critical thinking comes in, which is not necessarily taught in schools, is, together we say, hey, we don't know what we're going to do, but together we'll figure it out. We did some really kind of like theater exercises, improv, watched media, talked about things, and out of crafting some ideas of what we wanted to do, we created, then I went back and I wrote, using all that material of our time in the workshops, I wrote a 3-act play, and we performed it for 2 years. And it included historic figures, also current figures. There was a 7-year-old, Sanaa, who played Teresa in the play. And we also had, current day heroes. So really it is a way of demystifying, like, what is activism? What is being a hero? What is power, and what is your relationship to power? And especially as a kid, like we talked about, what about ageism? This is something no one ever talks about, really, except for kids, And so it's like, okay, you're a kid. How much power do you have? Where does your power lie? How do you, how can you use that? And so out of that whole process, many of the kids, one of the kids, Daniel Adams and Jasmine Adams, who were both actors on both years, then went on to be very active locally. And Junior, Daniel, I think it was 2018, recited his monologue during one of the Reclaim MLK rallies. And, it's really about taking things off the stage, or how their life, it's, you have this afterlife with the arts where it really impacts how you move through the world. And, the kids were very surprised at how the response that they got. And especially with some of these things that are that a lot of adults don't want to talk about or shy away from. And what I've learned is adults will follow the children. They'll come to a performance, they'll come to a pop-up art action, to support the children, to follow the children, to see what they're doing, whereas they might not, initiate that contact. And I think it's really important to say, kids have a very strong sense of justice. And so, when they're talking about something, they're not saying, well, I don't know, let's have a meeting. They're very straightforward about, that's wrong. I don't like it. Let's do something different. They're very direct. They cut to the bone. They have that, a really energy of, that just vital energy that really creates a lot of momentum and excitement, and it's refreshing. And so I know that the teachers, parents, even parents who voted against funding Black History Remix both years, because their kids were in it and their kids were so energized and activated. And, one parent said, oh my gosh, my kid was like, you got to take me to the library. And they, got got a whole stack of books. And then, that they were so invigorated by the process of creating something out of nothing. Like, what is more human than that? And so, they ended up being one of our biggest supporters, and they were one of the ones who voted against it. So, that transformation really happens close to us. So, of course, for me, finding a way, art is a way to connect to other people, where their humanity is most fully expressed. And, so thank you.
Thank you. And I love all of that so much, because with the work that we've been doing for years, we didn't always have the resources. And so a lot of times when me and Tammy, and I'm gonna say, we weren't seeking justice, we had to learn about the legal system, because I was doing a CRT event the other day, and one of the attorneys, Ashley Alvey, said, well, shoot, you got to learn the legal system, because there's not always justice in it. What you're seeking might not be in there, but if you understand the legal system, application of that understanding that informs you on how to work that system into where you're trying to get that outcome. And so, and seeking it and trying to get there, a lot of times we would have to meet up like at the museum, at the library, at coffee shops, and we would always give the children information or art to work with or books to work with. I remember when me and Tamberlee were meeting up and I told her, hey, we're going to be doing this installation called All Things Being Equal. And it's about the inequities in our communities. And a lot of the work that me and her had been doing, I felt that because her and her family were no longer, comfortable coming to our protests because they were witnesses when I was arrested in 2015. But because of Tarver and really the trauma related to protesting, she hadn't been able to be as involved. And so I started building these programs around art so that we could not only have the children involved, but because art is healing, and it's always there, it could provide that security for the children while the parents are learning the legal system, while we're researching the legal system, while we're showing up to these meetings, while we're out here making these demands and trying to build strategy. The children understand that we're seeking, justice as we would want it, but they also know that that's not a quick movement and it takes time. And so to fill that time up, we would utilize a lot of community engaged art and different things like that. And just talking about art and the legal system and the justice system. Tamberlee, let's hear your story. Like we just had, I feel like it's all of us, because whenever one of us wins, like how Layna has won in this school system, and I know we were out there protesting at the same time, and it just shows you the intersect of those time periods, what was, going on in our communities, and then really how we all were able to come together. But in the work that you've done on every level, it's helped other children. When, your baby was being lost from Woodlawn, we were able to use that to kind of hone in on them to be more accountable. When we were dealing with the education system and what was it, the CUBs or the IEPs?
The IEP.
Yeah,
Right.
and a lot of people didn't understand even that there was inequities involved in that. But me and Tammy were making these event pages on social media. We created a page called 40 Days Seeking Community. And whenever we would have a conversation or a discussion with anybody related to education, we would use Portland community media. We would broadcast these events. We would go to places where they really just wanted to exploit the fact that we were being loudmouths and showing up to places, but that still gave us a leverage to where, we would be respected or considered when we went to other spaces. And even if people didn't want to agree with us because they thought what we were coming to the table with was not doable, because people, why we all care about children, we don't always put forth the courage that it takes to protect them when we also have some kind of feeling of loss. And I don't understand that as a parent, and Tamberlee didn't understand that as a parent. So we had to kind of broaden what it means to care for our children in those systems, whether it was at the state capitol or the county or city hall or the streets. We had to bring that communication to the people. And I know that in the things that Tamberlee was fighting for, not only was education a component, but like Meshauna was talking about earlier, housing was a big situation. Our communities have been displaced for generations. And when I came home and I was looking for signs of life or community, all I saw was, I saw Isaka's murals. I saw the different artwork that was around our community, but I didn't see people in our community. And now that we're able to kind of anchor ourselves into art and our history in order to start motivating the listening for our voices, because it's not like we haven't been speaking as generations. Our voices have been loud. Our generations have blueprints of people being courageous enough to put statements on the record. But now that we're being able to create alarm with our voices and the unspoken disparities, I want to share how that's done and how that makes you feel. Tammy, how did you beat the Portland Housing Authority? What does that look like for someone who doesn't even realize that they're being retaliated against or not responded to in these systems? Because we saw so much of that.
Well, I would say the first thing is we got to make a correction on that statement, because we did not actually address the housing authority. And I think that that is still a missing piece with my case, because they are definitely complicit with the maltreatment that low income tenants have within the system, and it perpetuates a way for landlords to mistreat us and not have us in put us in substandard housing and things of that nature. And so that piece hasn't been tackled yet, but I did win my case against a private landlord who was discriminating against me and my family and had us living in substandard housing that was technically inhabitable.
And
So
I think, and I'm sorry, and I think one of the reasons, because I know that you were in a program that should have had oversight over that, right?
yes. And I guess within that piece, because they have inspections every 2 years, it was within the last 2 years that my housing pretty much fell apart and the landlord refused to do repairs and bring the house up to standard. But the way our system works is that once housing is aware that that your housing doesn't meet their standards or needs repair, and the landlord does not make those repairs within 30 days, it's the family that's being pushed out, because they really don't have any authority to do anything to the landlord. What they do is they stop payment on your rent, which forces you to move. And so ultimately, once again, the tenant is being punished. And we're in the middle of a housing crisis. We've been in the middle of a housing crisis for years now. And so that was the dilemma that I faced, was what do you do in the middle of a housing crisis where your landlord is refusing to fix stuff? He's having your garbage shut off. You're not having working appliances, but you really don't have any place to turn to. And the one place that you can turn to, which is your housing authority, who has an obligation to make sure that you're in a livable house, also is the one who has the authority to deem you houseless because your house is not up to their standards. And so that was the position that I was placed in. It's like, do you reach out for help and then it backfire? Because like I said, ultimately they don't have the authority to force repairs. They can't do that. I did try to go through the city. I reached out to the Portland Tenant Union to actually learn my rights, because that's the first thing that I do, is like try to find out what is my recourse, what are my rights, what are the landlord's obligations, what's my obligations. And so I was just trying to learn, for the most part, what I could do. And then when I started reaching out to agencies trying to get help, I either wasn't getting calls back or I was getting generic emails sent to me with links to the Oregon landlord tenant law, but not a direct response to my questions, not a direct link to assistance or help. By the time it got to the point where I knew that I needed legal help, I went to a couple of attorneys that were referred to me, and one was too busy to take my case. One did not want to be bothered because they said there was too much risk if I lost, because then I would owe the other side's legal fees and such. And knowing that I'm a low income parent, they didn't want to take that chance that I wouldn't have money to pay them and I'd have to owe the other side's attorneys. So, those were some of the things that I had to face, is people not want to take a chance on you, thinking that your case wasn't worth it. Or them not wanting to put their time in because they could take a different case and actually win some money and get paid. So there's so many different factors that we don't have any control over, even when that you have a case. And I knew that I had a case. from being with you, Teresa, you definitely taught me about documentation. If it isn't written, it didn't happen. If there's no witnesses, it didn't happen. And so that turned out to be the best advice ever, because I documented everything. My kids talk about me because they're like, Mom, your phone always shuts down, because I never delete my messages. I keep everything on there. And they're like, you got like 10,000 messages. You got to clear that stuff out, Mom. I might need that. And that was the basis of my case. The basis of my case was text messages between me and my landlord, where I'm begging for repairs to be done and I'm being ignored. You know, there was also a part of my case where they said that I didn't pay rent. And before I did start withholding rent to try to force repairs to be made, and it still didn't work. But they tried to lie and say that I was withholding rent longer than what I was. And so I had proof of that, because I had the text message where I said, because you did not fix X, Y, and Z, next month I'm going to withhold the rent. And so I had my proof, you know? And so if I wouldn't have had that, it would have been their word against mine. And what I've learned from living here in Portland, we don't get believed. Low income, single parent, you know, we don't get believed. And so if the other side would have said anything different than what I said, they would have been believed over me. And they did, even with my proof, even with my documentation. I saved all my text messages. I sent them to my emails. I had them printed out. I had a whole binder. Like I said, Teresa, you definitely taught me, Tammy, you got to build these cases. And I learned that, because even with the attorneys, with me building a case and showing them this was this, and this was that, and this was this, and this proves the discrimination, and this proves that I didn't have working appliances. Even with all that proof, I still did not have somebody running to take my case until I came to Don't Shoot Portland's legal clinic, and they referred me to the legal aid. And it was through that connection that I was able to secure an attorney that understood, from looking at the paperwork, that looked at my binder and all the documentation that I had in chronological order and everything else. And they were like, whoa, because I pretty much laid out the case for them, but it was clear. There was no way to deny any of the facts that I had stated.
And
there was no way.
Anybody you went to, you still had that same information. But again, they're in their own specific agency did not have the courage to show up for you.
Right.
You know, they wouldn't do it because they didn't want to be targeted or feel like they were retaliatory. And it's incredible to me that so many different organizations and individuals that work within the system that are on the direct line of access for people that they call vulnerable or at risk or disadvantaged communities, that they find it to be, that we're finding them to be acquiescent when it comes time for them to move to help make change happen, even to be accountable, even to serve us. I remember in the early years of advocacy, when me and you would go and we would advocate in these different systems, and we would be kind of like told to lie, like, oh, we'll just add this to documents. And we were like, no, don't lie. We just want to see what you have. Like, we had more integrity and ethics involved in our concern for research and getting acquisition of information so that we could show up for ourselves, so that we could self-advocate, than the people behind the desk. And so many times they created a spirit and an atmosphere of disconcern, to the point where you're going to a social service agency for support, and they're so disconcerted with who you are as an individual, or the fact that you're seeking guidance or seeking support, that it becomes a fight for resources. And I remember how the intimidation used to wear on us and how it used to wear on our family. I remember when we first started turning gray, and I was like, Tammy, what are they doing to us? You know, like all we're doing is trying to get this information so that we can adequately support our children and our community. And they're acting as if when we come and we're recommending that, you know, a housing authority should support the people who they're paying the rent for. They should
Right.
provide safe and health environments. They should guide through the process of a complaint against their landlords or any environmental complaints that might be happening. But we always find ourselves put at a you know, a disadvantage. It's not that we're disadvantaged, it's that the system creates more of a disadvantage. And I'm so proud of the work that you've done, because I remember at a time we had so many file folders and, you know, just started building agency and
Right.
operational systems so that we can adequately support more people as they realized that we were supporting people. I remember even one night you had been on the news and you were at a school board meeting or something that had to do with the school system, and they called you Teresa Rayford.
Yes,
they were like,
that was
"Oh,
one of those
Black lady."
workshops on the lead in the water at Tubman. And she was
Mhm.
like, okay, Miss Rayford,
And it
not
was like,
Teresa.
yeah, and I'm so glad we're past those days. They wouldn't dare now, but they were so, anytime a Black person would show up, they were so stunned by it, because if you didn't have somebody that was vetted supporting you and showing up, if you didn't have their, you know, green light or someone on their side showing up with you as a partner, you better be quiet. And the fact that you spoke up so many times and in so many different capacities for so many different people, I just thought it was important for you to share your victory, you know, because we don't win every time, but every
Right.
time we win, it is a win for a community. And like you said, those steps aren't over with that. And as an organization, as community impact shows up, we are in a more impactful situation to help further that. And I would encourage anybody that's being discriminated against or that's having abusive things done within a situation that they have no power over, whether it be their housing or, you know, the education that their children are getting or the way that they're being treated within our health center or even in just a park or spaces. Document that abuse, document that discrimination, because in 2020, there were so many promises and mandates for social change. There was so much money going into all these different agencies, and they've co-opted the movement of the people in the struggle. But right now, you have the ability to hold them accountable, because all we have to do is remind them on the record, you stated this, we have evidence of this, and now you need to reparate this issue because we're tired of it. I wanted to go ahead and get into Meshauna's, unless you had anything else to say, Tammy.
Well, I just want to say that pretty much reiterate what you just said. We need more people to step forward if they're being mistreated, discriminated against, or living in the substandard housing. We need more people to fight for those families. We need more attorneys to take our cases because we can't fight on our own. And like I said, if it was not for the Don't Shoot Portland legal clinic and hooking me up with legal aid, I wouldn't have had that victory. I wouldn't have had that victory. I wouldn't have had that support. And so I don't know what that looks like. I don't know, how do we get more attorneys on board? How do we get more attorneys on board to where families feel comfortable speaking up and not just being exploited by agencies, but actually being helped?
Well, right now we're working on that. And at the end of this panel, I'm going to be asking some direct questions to support people that need legal resources in regards to the protest and things like that. But at the same time, people can go to don'tshootpdx.org and can sign up and send us a contact us. It's been a lot of contacts coming through that email, but we will get in contact with you. But we're still in contact with lawyers right now, and we've been trying to develop a committee that will help us rebuild our community legal access, because as you know, since last year, we've been displaced, and it's kind of hard working out of the storage facilities and all the different spaces where we call working residencies. So Right now, we're working that out so that we can have it going back in 2022, because right now we do have a bigger capacity to help more in regards to legal support, and we want to make sure that we get it functioning.
Right.
So thank you. I mean, and you know that you've encouraged me to do this work for so many years, and you helped me since my nephew died and through so many different circumstances. So we will definitely make this bridge happen in regards to legal resources.
And definitely keep me posted, and I'm gonna stay a part of it.
Oh,
I'm gonna stay a part of
help you follow the
the
class
don't
action.
you. So
Look,
yeah,
let's talk, because we can get an
yeah,
attorney
definitely
and
got to
start
see what
talking
next
about
steps
that.
is.
Because
Yeah.
we need to do it. I still want to do things because of the audits that we have and the fact that we have that information now, just so that we can start pushing forth policy that makes sense, that is more inclusive and that does not discriminate, because it's not going to make itself. That
Right.
is the truth.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get into Meshauna real quick and have Meshauna. So you've been working on the Liberated Archives programming with us, and right now we're doing a residency, which we won't get into too much detail about, but because of the information that we shared today, and especially the fact that we were doing like work with the Albina Arts Center, and that kind of encouraged us on community preservation, me and you personally have been working on some stuff for like soul food lots and the preservation of the Burger Barn, looking at different buildings and architecture in our community. But then in also doing that, learning more about why people became displaced in our community, the underlying racial violence, the redlining, the mapping of communities, the displacement of families. Earlier, Layna had talked about the Indian Child Welfare Act. Black Portlanders didn't have that, so we overrepresented in the foster care system. Our children's parents overrepresent in mass incarceration. We're overrepresenting in suicides and homicides and all these different circumstances. And one of the things that I know for sure is that we don't get there just as a people, just because we are people. There are actually systems in place that are supposed to provide real infrastructure and safety and health and housing for all people. And when you're created to be like a punitive person, or like what you read in that 40s petition, someone who is not allowed to settle, someone who is not privileged to create a settlement in a community, that means you're an outsider. So there is no privilege of opportunity or resource. And so I wanted you to share a little bit more about that work for the Liberated Archives, and what that means to you as a person that is a descendant of people that have been displaced, marginalized, and treated that way in this community.
Thank you. To me, it's powerful. It was heartbreaking to see the depth of the heartbreaking and shocking to see the depth of the insidiousness of how of where like the culture that we are experiencing today, like where that came from, and how many people in the community supported that. My parents always had us living in white neighborhoods. Like I went to Irvington and Alameda and Sunset High School, and that was intentional to keep us out of, the Black neighborhood so that I would have a better opportunity for school. I remember them skimming over the paragraph of slavery in high school, and the atmosphere when I wanted to like talk more about that, like, what does that mean? I loved Indiana Jones growing up. I've always wanted to be an archaeologist. I've loved healing and nature. So I was understanding how we interact today, how that was influenced by yesterday, is really interesting to me. In my own family, on my white side, they've been here since the 1800s. And my grandmother married and had children with a Black Panther, and they were racist against their own grandchildren until they met us. After they passed, I have no contact with that side of the family. I've experienced, so having those experiences and then seeing how those structures were decided back then, it just, to me, it seems to go against human evolution. And to be able to give people, so after we did the soul food lots and the attempting to preserve the burger barn, I assisted Teresa with a archiving workshop through the Multnomah County Library, and just breaking down those doors and building relationships with, with
And the other one too. No, she did another one.
yours. You're muted.
Look for her email,
I
please.
did.
I'm sorry.
Teresa, you're not muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I was trying to get these questions together. I'm like, oops.
We experienced a lot of opposition. We experienced a lot of friction just experiencing that first workshop to teach people how to preserve their history. And right now with the Liberated Archives project that we're working on, it's exciting because we get to give power to our voices that were silenced back then. And that's through just learning about our past, our families, our connections, how things were back then. And also looking at the underlying racism that was dictating our lives. You could see it in the photos. You could see the transition from when the folks in the photos were younger, like teenagers, to where they were adults. You could see the pain, you could see the background changing. There's a story there, and that story is tied to the oppressive policies that we are still experiencing today in Portland and all across the world. And so I feel really honored to be able to show that blueprint against the beauty of the Black struggle. And I'm just excited to, when we do launch it for the community, for you all to see. And I did share the link to the Liberated Archives exhibit that we did withholding this summer. So there's a short virtual tour and scan PDFs of all the documents, of all the images that were in that gallery. And so I encourage you to check those out and look closely at the addresses on that petition. You may see your house, your grandparents' house. Look at the language of, in my previous career, I was part of producing data for the State of Black Oregon Report for the past non-organizations that I worked for, and to see the, that original and the language that they use to describe Black and Brown and other minorities, Asians, Pacific Islanders were also included in that. It is dehumanizing. That article was also published. I can share it in the chat when I'm done with my piece. But it's really enlightening because they just changed certain keywords to make it reflective of today and to hide with legal terminology the racism and the oppression, but it's still there. And it's really exciting working with the archivists that volunteer with the organization, them telling our stories. One of the women, just her recounting how she had to scan each individual document and what she felt going through and having to fight, because those documents were not labeled for preservation. They saved those documents. So like we're literally fighting to save history that, they're trying to rewrite history, and we cannot allow that, because with the ugly truth comes healing. And we need to get that ugliness out so that we can heal. And I was watching one of the James Baldwin interviews earlier this morning, and I'm not going to try to butcher his quote. But he basically was talking about how the color of our skin is, a reflection of the truth. And it's hard seeing the truth in your face every day. And it's easier to deny it and pretend and abide by how our allies and like white folks are able to choose when they participate. They can check out. We can't check out. And I just think that's beautiful. And I encourage you to watch the older James Baldwin interviews. Thank you.
Meshauna, I wanted to touch on something that you said. You were talking about on the white side of your family, how you could see the different stature over time of how people were working through life, and the difference between like the Black side of the family and, like the people that were oppressing the people that were being oppressed. How important is it that people not only learn about archives in the city, the county, and the state, so that they can understand about what happened in regards to policies and mandates that we see today that affect us, but how important is it for them just personally to document your own family history, to find out where information is within your own household? Because that's something also, we're in a generation that actually uses Facebook as an archive, right? And so you can see years of information on your Facebook or your Instagram, or it used to be your MySpace. And we know that from MySpace, how small those images came and how that site just really became irrelevant, that the same thing could possibly happen with these other social medias. And a lot of people don't know about downloading their data or any of those things. So it's important to go back before we were even doing digital pictures and to go into those photo albums. Personally, how important do you think it is to do that work, since you've been connected to the research point of preservation?
I think it's incredibly important. My family experienced the crack pandemic, the crack war, the attack on Black families, Black lives, and that caused our family to fracture. And a lot of the customs, the traditions, recipes, rearing guidance, a lot of those things, the identity of carrying, how my aunts, uncles, my grandparents would carry themselves before, I saw how drugs, changed them, or how this system, changed them over time. It gave me pride, and it made me feel, that I was, this is where I came from. I feel that I was more than just, or not that I was more than just, it gave me a glimpse of things that are important for a child to know, that their family, that we had good relationships. Because when the crack pandemic hit, those traditions were taken, wealth was taken, and today the children of myself and all my first cousins and second cousins, we are rebuilding. I'm rebuilding, and there's still fractions. I don't know who they are. I've been around town or even growing up, I've seen people that had similar features to me, but I didn't know if they were my relative or not. And so it provided me with, it feels good to be able to have that history and remind us that we are not just the struggle. As we see with slavery, Blacks came out really strong after slavery, and that's a huge secret that's being denied from us. And when we go through those old photo albums, we see the strength and the greatness, the truth of what mainstream media, does not want to show unless it is a controlled, programmed image of what they think the Black family should be. And so it's incredibly powerful because it's a chance to connect with our own traditions.
Well, thank you all. I wanted to go ahead. I promised the legal part, right? I wanted to, because it is Black Friday, usually we do some type of community service, or we would even just protest and carry the names of people. I remember the first year we did a Not Black Friday event. It was in honor of Tamir Rice, who was killed in the month of November. I believe it was the 22nd of November. And he was a 12-year-old boy in Ohio playing with a toy gun at a park, but he was killed by a police officer. And we were already organizing around the verdict from the Ferguson uprising. And so we added his name, unfortunately, to those that we carried that year. And when we did the Black Friday that year, it was in his honor and in honor of all the other people, including Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner, Mike Brown, I believe, Natasha McKenna, just so many different people that had been lost to us that year, that had made high profile movements happen because people were able to connect our strategies. Everybody across the country that was on the front line, we were using social media to connect our communities and to connect our strategies. And so that was a year of building movement work. And I believe that that's part of where we have the spark for the Black Lives Matter movement. We were all out there when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and we protested for him, but we didn't have sustainable protest until the death of Mike Brown and all those other people that we showed up for. And so it's in the reasonableness of protest. And because this is the year 2021, I wanted to reflect really quick back on 2020. And I would say get a pencil and a piece of paper, whether you're a panelist or whether you are just watching in, and just take these answers down or write down the questions. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about protesting. And I'm going to also make sure that these are available on our follow-ups, because we're going to want to be in contact with people that may have been harmed in protesting. But these are also general questions. Yeah. So these are questions for folks who were out on the streets last year. So if you weren't on the streets last year, you don't have to question these to respond to these. But if you were, or if you know somebody that was, you might want to share these questions with them. What would make you feel safe going back out to protest? From what you've seen in the streets, what would make you feel safe to go back out and protest? Number 2, what were your overwhelming takeaways from the George Floyd protest? What were your overwhelming takeaways from the George Floyd protest? Did you file a complaint with the city or the IPR over your experience? Why or what not was the outcome if you did? Do you feel it was a fair process? Why or why not? And the IPR program is the Independent Police Review, or the City of Portland. And that's basically if you were injured or if you were harmed or if you saw something at a protest that you wanted to commend or that you wanted to file a complaint about, you would go to the city, and there's this process through the IPR, which is a part of the auditor's office, that helps you document your complaints. So if you filed any complaints, or if you know someone who filed a complaint, please go ahead and answer that. And then also if there was an outcome, if you believe it was a fair process. What police violence was done to you and others around you at protest? And you can write that down. And even if you witnessed it and you want to answer what you saw and how it made you feel, I would like to know. Because as someone who is a witness to protest, a lot of the work that we do with bystander intervention is how to document what you're seeing and how to utilize that documentation to support people and to support change in reform or abolition. Has there been any lasting impact of experiencing or witnessing that police violence? Also, feelings about being involved in protests, your feelings about safety when police are around or involved in something. Share those feelings. And you're not going to be sharing this with me. I would like to know. But again, I would like for you to take the time to write this down. If you would like to share it with me, I would like to get it from you. But if you don't want to share it with me, you don't have to. I just want you to share if there's been any lasting impacts or experiences from witnessing the police violence and your feelings about being involved in the protests, your feelings about safety when police are around or involved in something, whether it's protests or anything else. How do you feel? All right. And then given that you've experienced and seen since 2020, where do you see the police in Portland in the next 2 years? And we're asking about 2020 specifically because obviously our organization filed lawsuits against the city of Portland and the federal government for their use of force against people that were exercising their First Amendment rights. And as community organizers, we want to continue to promote that commitment for social change. And so it makes a lot of sense for us being in a position to compromise or negotiate to understand, basically what you've experienced and where do you see the police, because we get to share that information to make social change happen. And even if it doesn't happen, we have the ability to use that information to build influence. So I'll say that question again. Given what you've experienced and seen since 2020, where do you see the police in Portland in the next 2 years? Or what would you like to see? Do you think the PPB's, the Portland Police Bureau's use of weapons was justified in 2020? Why or why not? Looking for descriptions of weapons used, the way that people basically trying to get people in line, or the way that on people who did nothing, or the way that use of force was used on people who did nothing that would allow for force to be used or a weapon used. And so basically I'm asking if you saw the police harming people, trying to get people to move, using weapons against people, interacting with people that they felt like they had a problem with, what do you think that their use of force or their use of weapons was justified? Why or why not? And again, looking for descriptions of weapon use that was way out of line on people who did nothing that would allow for force to be used, and weapon use on whole crowds. So if you've seen them using a weapon, even if it was tear gas or rubber bullets or anything on the whole crowd, or if you've seen them injuring someone personally, I would like to know. And anybody that you know that would like to answer those questions, I would like to know how that feels for them. Also, one of the last questions that I want to ask was, have you been subjected to force by Portland police in 2021? And if so, when, where, and what type of force in this year, period? If you've been engaged in the police encounter, and if they've used use of force towards you in the year 2021. Not just at protests, anywhere. If you feel like you were targeted or anything like that, just go ahead and write that information down. And again, if you would like to share that information with me, whether you're a panelist or whether you're watching this live, please feel free to do so. And just as a way of following up, when we do the edited version of these videos, I'll make sure that these questions are available to you and also in our next newsletter. Thank you again for everybody that's tuned in. And any takeaways I wanted to ask, obviously the protest happened because we were, outraged about the death of Ahmaud Arbery. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, and so many other people. This past week, we had outcomes to trials for Kyle Rittenhouse and also for Ahmaud Arbery. For Kyle Rittenhouse, even though there was blatant racism in the courtroom, I think that the outcome was systemically what we all have become used to. I don't think that there was anything surprising there. I think that there's a lot of motivated white supremacists or people that are leaning in that way, that are using him to kind of bolster their egos. But for most people that are out there protesting, we know that there are leaders that have been shot. We know that people that attend protests have been targeted for generations. And one of the things that brings us to understanding that knowledge is our annual MLK March. We know that Dr. King not only was on the forefront of the movement for human rights and dignity, but we also know that an assassination took his life. We know that vigilante justice exists in the activist movement. And I would never want anybody to think that what happened in Kenosha in that courtroom creates a new trend that we're concerned with. We've always had those concerns of being harmed at protests. But for the outcome that we saw in Georgia, in Brunswick, Georgia, for the death of Ahmaud Arbery, I just want to ask each one of you, and you can answer how you feel, but I would like to know, how do you, as parents, because all of you are moms, how do you feel about that verdict? And if you were able to watch the trial, how did you feel about the trial? And I'll let y'all take off.
I'll go ahead and start. As you had stated earlier about me discontinuing with the protests with the community, and that started, quite a few years ago, before COVID, before the George Floyd murder, when we were doing a Black Friday march, heading down, and we were almost to Lloyd Center, and the police rolled up on us with the bikes. Then we saw the SWAT truck come up with the police hanging off the sides, a good 12 to 15 police. And that was the last time that I was able to protest with the community because of the impact that it had on my baby, because they were terrified. We had never been approached like that, seeing the police using their bicycles as weapons against the protesters, ramming their bikes into us and things of that nature. And then we got left from the crowd because I kind of steered off to the side to let the rest of the group pass by as I calmed my kid down who's freaking out. And that was the last time that we were able to express and be part of the civil unrest and visibly fight for our rights and stuff. And it's really disheartening to me because we want to be there and we believe in what the community's doing and what they're fighting for, the justices and stuff, but we're not able to because that really impacted my family. And I didn't want to add to the trauma by continuing to come out, but still fighting in different ways and being there in different ways, trying to show up for the community in different ways that I felt was safe for me and my family. And to me, it's a form of silencing too, though. It's a form of intimidation because they got the result. I'm probably not the only family that stopped coming out to support in that manner of being visible and being a body present because of those type of tactics that the police were using that day, So we also want to make sure that people know that there's other people that still support that just can't come out because we don't feel safe. And we have to do what's best, for ourselves and our families and our mentals. And we can't all the time put ourselves on the line and stuff and becoming targets. Because retaliation is real in Portland. Definitely. Absolutely. Because I would have been out there. I'd probably still be out there, but we just can't do it anymore, and so we have to be able to put our energies in different ways of supporting the community and doing the informationals, the education, the advocacy in a different way that is safe, but still effective, you know?
And you're right about that, because I've been hit by cars at protests. I've been targeted. We've had people pull guns out on us and all kinds of stuff. And we've never had any support from the community or the leaders that showed up at the protests last year saying Black Lives Matter. A lot of people that showed up last year knew that they were safe in their
Right.
opportunity to show up, and
Right.
they would leave at a certain time that would make it unsafe for the people that stayed. And so there's also a programmed agenda regarding who's safe at a protest, who's protected at a protest, who's allowed to protest, and who's not allowed to protest. And before last year, when it was an election season and all these other
Right.
reasons for people to show up in solidarity, we didn't have the protection. People
Right.
thought that even though we were out there with children, we were the violent ones, when you could clearly see the police attacking us, whether we were
Yes.
on sidewalks or whether we had senior citizens out there with the signs, or whether it was children. They did not care. I remember
Right.
when Quantas Hayes was murdered and his grandmother put daffodils out while we were doing a die-in. And it wasn't a city sanctioned die-in like, they have now, where there's different agencies that coming together. It was us, it was community members that were horrified by the death of Quantas Hayes by Andrew Hurst. And when she put the daffodils down, by the time she put the last one down, and this is his great grandmother, they swarmed in like nothing. And I was like, wait a minute, they could have injured that woman. They could have injured any of those children that were out there. And it wasn't a busy day in downtown Portland or anything like that, And so when we're doing peaceful stuff with flowers and signs and children and their families coming as they are with the spirit of community, we should never have to deal with violence. And the fact that we've been dealing with it for 11 years plus, just because we care enough to continue to show up is not humiliating for us. It is a scar on this city. We can't say that we're the city of roses when we hurt the people that are the roses. So Tammy, I just want to let you know that the time that you've been there for us as an organization, as me, and me personally as a person, that it makes up for any absence. And we know that you're always there with us in spirit. So,
but I think that's
but
it's a lot of people that don't seem to understand that a lot of organizations that have popped up since the beginning, when we weren't supported out there on the front lines, that are all the vetted and co-opted movements that are now reaping the benefits of what we got started and what we were advocating, what we've been saying for the last 10, 11 years now, that we weren't listened to, that we magnified those issues coming forward, but nobody was on the bandwagon until money started getting involved. And, now everybody's Black Lives Matter when you wasn't screaming it before,
Right now we're still here. We're still here.
I hope that, and I hope that people start coming to being authentic and genuine about it and really believing that Black Lives Matter, not just when funding's involved.
Yeah, I think it was seasonal, but I think that people are realizing that white supremacy isn't going away because we got Donald Trump out of the White House, and that we definitely have to start picking up the measure of communication and strategy to build together, because we can't be on separate sides with the white supremacist side being bigger than both of our halves. We're all in pieces fighting against each other, and you have this 51% that's standing there in solidarity, and their messaging is hate. And if we don't stand together, they're going to demolish us, as we've all bore witness to. Meshauna, your takeaways?
I couldn't, with the Kyle, I was not surprised. I couldn't watch past day 2 of the trial proceedings. With Ahmaud Arbery, I couldn't stop crying. I was really happy for it was vindication. I myself, like Tammy, I haven't participated in a lot of the like downtown protests. But I was working behind the scenes, supporting those endeavors. And even that it was huge vindication, because in the early days, like Teresa said, there was no protection, whether protesting, just trying to show up to meetings, just trying to exist, and just traveling. It was security concerns leaving events where she was invited to go and speak, and they would her ideas would be, raped from her. And we see a lot of, as you said, these pop-up organizations that, their missions are founded on the blood, sweat, and tears of Teresa and a lot of the people that were involved in, sacrificing themselves and, their safety, their jobs, for doing what was good. In response with the police, I wasn't there at those downtown protests, but I have other experiences with the police and white supremacists attacking and targeting because of the work that we've been doing. I really don't want to overshare on those individual experiences. But yeah, it was more a vindication because it was a hard win. We fought so hard to get there. It takes more than just people showing up in the streets. Like, people have to stand up and show up when it matters. Not just because it's the hype thing to do and making it political. And yeah, I'm really happy for that. And I really look forward to, making more waves on this movement so that we make it not okay to be racist and bigots, and we make that intolerable.
Marginalized
and
white supremacists, right? Marginalized
Yes.
white supremacists.
Yeah.
Right. Any takeaways, Layna, about protest, or your thoughts or feelings about the trials?
Yes, thank you. Our whole conversation has been really meaningful. And yeah, I mean, really, it's like, that's why I do what I do in collaboration with youth and other artists and activists. And one of the things is, there's a very different experience of life for white people and white Americans largely, and Black and brown Americans. It's like there's, and I have a white side of my family and a Black and brown side of my family. And so it's as personal as well as observing, and that white Americans are really are experiencing a utopia to a degree. And the rest of us are really experiencing and have experienced and are still experiencing an apocalypse. And we're living this very dystopian experience. And the heartache and the suffering and it's so much compounded tragedy. And of course, everyone experiences tragedy, but without any recourse or very little recourse, just echoing what everyone has said about the trials, that it's business as usual. And then we had some some recourse. However, it's not going to, bring back Ahmaud, and it's not going to stop, the next, hopefully it'll discourage, but we have, it's just, this is why for me, art is so powerful, because also a lot of the things that we're trying to talk about are really beyond words, even beyond language, especially the way that this pain and trauma lives in our bodies and is passed on generation after generation and is alive in us. And it's like, still, we wake up, we walk out the door, we're trying to navigate and to carry this immense weight. And especially working in the arts and in nonverbal expression, creative expression, we begin to even start to process that and maybe metabolize it in our bodies, in our systems, and then release it in creative ways. And, that can take many, many forms. And it's a healing process to be able to be in community and collaborate. And even sometimes when no words are spoken, or it's not about a statement, but it's about a lived, embodied practice that we're moving through. And whether that's just doing some painting or dance, or whatever it is that we're doing, taking photographs on a nature walk, or, all of these things are ways that we can take care of ourselves and each other, and also to connect to each other, especially, after many of us have been so isolated. And even though we luckily have this democratizing platforms and technology that we're able to communicate with each other, but to be able to be together and connect in these ways is very healing. And I mean, I don't have I don't have all the answers, but I know for me, like, to mediate all of that and to try to move through it, and to not just survive it, but to be able to, to really like live, even thrive in my own way through it, is just to be able to offer that to other people and give people the opportunity and create the conditions where people feel comfortable coming and being a part of something. I do want to say that I do want to echo about what you said about the organizations. And years ago, I was saying, as soon as these equity dollars come down, all of a sudden, every organization in Portland is doing equity work. And now we have all of these fantastic, incredible DEI policies and statements, these outward facing statements by all of these organizations, and taking on, the beauty is that they have they've created their own measuring stick. The challenge is putting it into practice. And so, but the thing is, looking at it from a very logistical, like how do you interface with organizations who have this beautiful DEI policy, and yet they're harming people? They're still enacting racist, white supremacist delusion practices, and specifically misogynoir, brutal, passive aggressive often, which is the style of Pacific Northwest, brutal icing out and indirect violence against Black women, especially when we are not when we're not behaving or getting their permission first before, surviving, living, advocating for ourselves, our families, our children, our elders, then we really are like, oh, okay, I see how this is working. And this is not following the protocols that you have set in place. And so really the way that I navigate that is I simply say like, oh, well, how is this, how are these practices aligning with the policies that you've set in place? Help me understand how these are working together. Your values, your mission that you set out, that you put on your website and all of your materials. And are the grantors, are all of your funders aware of how you're enacting these policies into practices or not enacting them at all? And so sometimes that is the best and most direct and most effective way to deal with that. And obviously dealing with it and with the vehicle of using the vehicle of arts and arts practices make it a lot more attractive and a lot more accessible, to everybody who's interested. So yeah, I did want to say that. And we're just, as far as the protests, my father was actively passing. I mean, we're so fortunate to have him for so long. And, it was a choice that I made to be able to be with him and to stay isolated so that I could be with him, and which is, which I had a lot. It was a hard choice, but I'm glad that I did it. He has since passed, and thank you, Teresa, for all of your love and care for my father, Don Lewis, and always acknowledging him and recognizing him and his contribution. And I continue to use art and put up panels and memorials and pay Black artists, pay Indigenous artists, and have, do other things like have an artist incubator retreat with 10 Black and Indigenous artists, paying them, providing a way for them to be together, nourish, each other, and just be in community with each other for 5 days in 2020, safely, in a space out in the forest where everyone had their own cabin. So we were able to be there, and there's just we really shifted a lot of our programming, obviously because of COVID, but we were still extremely active and able to raise funds and do things and put money into people's hands and pockets to be able to give them the opportunity to continue, making art with each other, being able to process and heal, but on their own, and with their own, however they chose to express. And that's a part of art, is that it's very autonomous. It's about you express as you wish, as you're willing to, and and then somebody else takes that in as through their own experiences and through that filter, and they derive meaning from it, maybe in an entirely different way than was the artist experience. And it's for everyone. Protests can look very different. Yeah.
They do. And I was going to say, just to close, that one of the things that I heard, like I was watching the Black News Channel when we got the verdict for Ahmaud Arbery's death, the verdict in the trial of McMichael's Bryan defendants. And I started listening to what people were saying in their interviews and what people were talking about on Twitter and on different social media. And one of the things that was really a foundational, just straight across the board statement was that without social media, without people on videos, without people in protests, without people in their communities making art and coming together, we would never have seen this case even come to court. Ahmaud Arbery was killed on February 23rd of 2020, and they did not arrest the people involved in his murder until May. And it was because of the voices from the community. It was because of the memorialized images of him. It was because people were having conversations like the ones that we're having right now. Because we've had to live through a quarantine and we've learned how to utilize different skill sets and different tools that we have at our fingertips in order to continue communicating these issues, we are still able to mobilize communities into social change. And because of those efforts, it is undeniable in that case, for one, and I think we should all take that with us and we should all reflect on that because it is empowering. It emboldens us to do more. But the fact that during a quarantine, during a global pandemic, that a man that was murdered, that we were able to force the legal system to represent in a courtroom where we were able to find guilty all of these defendants, and there's still a federal hate crime trial that's coming up in February. But to know that we all did that collectively together from our living rooms, our bedrooms, our backyards, our neighborhoods, that in fact to me is social change in action. And I just want to thank anybody that's tuned in. I want to thank everybody that's been tuned into these movements, that has promoted, that have shared, that has been of concern. Thank you all. And continue doing what you're doing. Continue having conversations. In our formation of these events, the panels, the Zooms, we're not trying to follow a patriarchal focus. We're not trying to follow their foundation of programming. We're in each other's living rooms and we're speaking like we would back in the 50s about these issues. We're speaking like we would if we were on a stoop in the 70s talking about these situations. For us, time has not changed when we talk about public safety in our communities and white supremacist violence and policy and the discrimination that creates alienation for us. Nothing has changed. Our communication continues, but we are winning and we have to continue. We have to engage our children and we have to keep engaging our communities. Continue to do the right thing. Thank y'all for joining us today, and Black Lives Matter, not Black Friday. Peace, y'all.